hello, everybody. We decided, you may have watched a Sonic Talk where me and Matt Hodson, a.k.a. Maths, who's over there in Brighton in his remote location. How you doing, Matt?
Hello, Nick. Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Are you right?
Yeah, I'm good. So we were talking about this idea of doing basically collaborating over a network somehow. And we figured that there may be a way for us to network MIDI to each other by using just sort of free tools. And we kind of figured it out. So we thought we'd share that with you, because part of the reason we're doing is this, because Matt is going to be doing some of our, doing one of his live streams, and he's going to use some of the MIDI that I send him to work on a track. Is that about the size of it, Matt?
Yeah, that's about it. Yeah, we said we'd, I said I'd come on to Sonicstate and do one of my tracks from scratch, which I've been doing over lockdown. And as we were preparing for this, I said to Nick, maybe you could send me some MIDI to play with as an initial starting point for the track and go from there. And then, of course, we just went down this rabbit hole, didn't we, about how do we send MIDI from one side of the country to another over the internet in a usable fashion. And this is where we've got to. So I guess we thought we'd share it, right?
We would, yeah. So we should point out, yes, I could have recorded a session and sent him the data. Yeah, I know that. We know all of this stuff, but this is just kind of cool. So we're going to show you how we did this. So first of all, I want to do a little shout out to Deep Signal Studios. I found this basically RTP MIDI over the internet. Now, for those of you who don't know, RTP MIDI is baked into OSX. We're both on Mac computers. There is a little utility that you can get for Windows. Perhaps I'll show you that in some more detail a bit later on, or in another video. But what it enables us to do is to set up a network MIDI session. So we're going to start from here. But before we go there, there's a few prerequisites, because we need to be able to have our routers talk to each other. And usually, if you're at home, you're with a cable provider or an internet provider, usually the ports are going to be locked down. So you have to specifically say, can you open up some little holes in my network that will route these particular port numbers to a particular machine? And so that was our starting point, right, Matt?
Yeah, so the first thing I had to do was find my admin password for my router, which everyone's probably changed and forgotten. I did. So log into your router. I happen to be on Virgin, so logged into there, into the back end of the admin, and go in and find some ports. Now, the important thing, as you'll see, is that both Nick and I open up the same ports. So they're like virtual holes from one side from my computer to Nick's, running over the internet.
Exactly. So I'll show you on this is my setup. I'm on BT, but most routers will have the same thing. You can see there's a number of them here, which I won't show you. But what I've done is I've set these two here, which is RTP MIDI notes and RTP start. And this is going to my laptop. And the port numbers are 5005 and 5004. So you do a start and an end on those. So that basically opens up those specific ports and routes them directly to this machine. That's what opening a hole in the firewall is. You might have other holes open up for PlayStations and stuff, and we're using TCP UDP. So that's the starting point. So you need to do that first at both ends. That's the first thing. The next step is you need to find out what your IP address is of. This is the IP address that your internet connection possesses. So, for instance, if you go to somewhere like what's my IP, in fact, if I do that now, I think that it's actually myip.com, isn't it?
It was certainly the easiest way for me to find out my IP.
What's myip.com? Okay, so I've got what's myip.com. I'm just going to throw my window up there. I'll hide my IP because I don't really want loads of people logging in, but it'll tell you what your IP address is. You need to make a note of that number there, which you won't see because it's blocked out. But so you start with that, and then the next thing you do is we need to go to Audio MIDI Setup, which is in the Mac. You have a utility, which is Audio MIDI Setup. I've got it here on my address bar. If I just bring my window up here, I'll open this up. So I've got Audio MIDI Setup. Then you want to open MIDI Studio, and then you want to go Open MIDI Network Setup. So what this allows you to do is create a session. I've created a session called External MIDI, but I could just create another one called Session 3, whatever. It doesn't really matter, but that's what we're going to call it. And that's what our my MIDI open up a network session port that my software can recognize as a MIDI port that it can read and write MIDI from. So I've created this session here. Then what I need to do is I need to create another connection. So I'm going to do this here. So I would call this, let's call this Matt MIDI 2. Now Matt needs to tell me what the number of his network is, and I would post that in host, and then in the port I would be writing 5004, which is the standard port. I've got that already set up. So if I just click that here, it says Matt MIDI, that's his address, and then the host. I've also set one up for my end, which has got my IP address. So what's happening there is, for testing purposes, it means I can send MIDI out into the internet. It comes back into my IP address, sort of via the firewall and back in, so I can monitor that I know that I'm sending out into the world and back again. So now what Matt needs to do is essentially a similar thing his end, right?
Yeah, so I've gone and opened up my MIDI network setup here in the same way as Nick. I've created a session, which I've just called MIDI Net. And within that, in a directory here, I've created a new directory, which I've called MIDI Nick. So I know this is going to be essentially listening to Nick's IP, which I've put in there in the host. And the port, again, the very important thing as we started at the beginning of this video is that it's got to be the same port, 5004. So that means that they're essentially, now we're going to be listening down the same hole, if you like, for incoming MIDI to my computer.
If you just disconnect that session a second, and then we can see it reconnect. So if you just click on the one in, so if you just, in the box that is participants, if you click on that and just disconnect. So now, if you just click connect.
Click on that, click connect. Nick's now appeared here as MIDI Nick. And actually, if he starts hitting his keyboard, I can actually monitor straight away in here. You see this little red dot here? That's showing me actually the latency coming in, which is about
quite low, isn't it?
It's about, that's about maybe 11, 12 milliseconds perhaps.
Yeah, the round trip is going to be a bit longer. Right, we're getting ahead of ourselves. So that's the starting point. So what we've essentially done, just to re-explain, is we've created our own little network, MIDI network, that only, I mean, I would suggest, if you are going to do this, what you should do is, who may connect to me, you just go only computers in my directory. Because that means I've got Matt here, he's in my directory, otherwise anybody would come in. So I'm just going to go only computers in my directory, because that basically stops anybody else from coming in. So we've created this little MIDI network that is going down this port between our two computers on remote IPs on 5004. That's essentially, and now the next stage is to create the mappings to allow us to listen and send. So I'm going to move over to my my Reaper window. So I'm using Reaper here. I've got my MIDI keyboard here. So so now I will, in Reaper or in anything, that I'm going to be using MIDI ports in, I've just basically looked to see, I want to add a MIDI device, and I've set external MIDI. External MIDI, if you remember, is the name of my little MIDI session that I've got here. So external MIDI is showing up as a port, an input and an output port. So now when I hit a track in here, I've got my MIDI. I can use external MIDI as an input. Actually, I'm getting external MIDI. I'm getting my MIDI from my Arturia Keystep, which is this guy here. But what I've actually done is I'm routing the output of the external of that MIDI track to the external MIDI as well. So we're hearing the local. This is Labs, I believe. It's just Spitfire Labs. I open that up. You can see that. That's all pretty straightforward. Got some MIDI control, so I can hear that my end. So now, if Matt listens on his port, because my MIDI is going out to that network. So now what he needs to do is to set it up so that his input is listening. He's listening on the same network MIDI port. It may seem a little bit complicated, but you'll get there in the end. So right, Matt, show us how you've got yours set up.
Great, yeah. So for Ableton users, that you just go to your preferences, go into link/MIDI, and here you can turn on and off all your MIDI ports. So you can see I've got my Keystep here and IRA modular and various things that I'm using. But the key one that I want to turn on is listening in to Network MIDI Net, which, if you remember, is the name of my session, which is MIDI Net. So I'm turning that on, track on, which means that any MIDI coming in via that MIDI port will be able to play something on a track. I've then gone over to Ableton, created a simple MIDI track. I've placed on it a grand piano, and I've selected MIDI listening in from MIDI Net as my input. I put monitor input to in, so now it's listening to any MIDI coming in via MIDI Net over port 5004. Remember that important number. And Nick should now be able to essentially play his magic keys, and we should hear some audio.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to switch it on so you can hear it locally, because I've got it set to not, because I'd be hearing it both, which is a bit weird. So, right. So I'm going to switch to my shot. So now you can hear the first note is my local MIDI piano. And the second note is Matt's MIDI piano that I'm hearing coming back over his network. He's sharing a screen over Zoom. So there is latency, but that's inherent in that round trip. But what that means is if we now set our tempos towards each other, at the same tempo, we could take this a little bit further. Will it work with MIDI Clock and MIDI Sync? Now, I'm going to basically see if I can get that to work. So what I'm going to Reaper, I'm just going to basically, I'm using the word basically a lot. It's not basic at all. It's quite complicated. I'm going to enable synchronization, and I'm going to choose song position pointer from the external MIDI session. So now, if Matt plays if he now sends MIDI Clock to the external MIDI session, let's see what happens now.
So to do that, preferences again, and this time this is going to be MIDI going out, and I want to send not track, but I want to send sync to Nick. So I'll turn that on, and now basically when I hit play in Ableton, Reaper should start playing at Nick's end. So I'm going to hit play now.
And there's mine. Sure. And I'm going to switch if you switch your
metronome
on.
That's my metronome.
We're a bit out, so I'll take that off. But what we could do, we can tinker that with, I can set an offset incoming time code. It's not perfect, and like I said, we're doing this because we can. You may find some useful and more interesting approaches to dealing with this. We're doing this because we can, because obviously, it's not exactly zero latency. I wouldn't want to be playing drums to a live track that he might have grooved. I'd just get him to send me the session. I'd lay the tracks down and send it back. But we just thought this might be something that you would find interesting, and to know that you can actually run network MIDI between units, because there are commercial products that cost, $60-70 that you have to get each. We thought, I'm sure you could do this for nothing, and we have, but there is a sort of kludge to it, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of works. I tell you what, Nick, what I'll do now, I'll just turn off my sync so I'm not sending you any sync, and I'll just put it in record, and why don't you record a little phrase in or something, and then I've got that MIDI in. I can maybe use that as a start of the next track from scratch that I do for you, or something like that.
Okay, I'll give it a shot.
Let's. So, do you want to hear my metronome, Nick?
Yeah, why not? Let's give it a try.
Yeah. Okay.
Let me take myself out of sync, because I don't really want to. Mine doesn't need to play locally, does it?
No, it doesn't.
But I suppose, but while we say that, the thing is what we could do is, if we had them all synced up, Matt could be playing his locally, and then I could record it and send him the MIDI. There's all sorts of different possibilities for this. Yeah. So I'm just going to go back to my my shot here. Let's open so you can see that Labs is playing as well, just so that it's fairly clear what's happening. So yeah, there we go. All right, I'll try and play some chords. I'm hearing both, but that's okay.
And I can see the MIDI notes being recorded in real time into Ableton.
Let's quit while we're ahead and see how that works. So there will be an offset. So I'm just curious to know, Matt, what is the offset in your window? So so that looks like it's about a quarter note, just under a quarter note. So, but you can grab all of that and just move it back, and it should be pretty much.
Yeah, you can see if I zoom in. There's the start of the bar 3, and that's kind of how much gap there is there. So like you say, Nick, I could just copy, I can just highlight all of this, and if I really wanted to, I can drag that over and have it starting at the start of the bar. Now look at that.
That's not bad. That's pretty. So I was just playing to a click there. That's not quantized.
Yeah.
The thing that's really interesting about this as well is now you can send me back that MIDI over the network, so I can listen to what I played via my own instrument. Which is, I mean, what's the point, you ask? And you're probably right. There isn't much point. But what I could do is I've got another track here. I'm choosing external MIDI as my input. I've got another instance of labs here just for the sake of it. So now, if I'll take the arm off this. So this track here that is selected is only listening to the external network MIDI, which if Matt plays, will probably play my instrument, right?
Sure.
So you play your end.
I just need to quickly set up a new MIDI track here. Sorry, that's an audio track. Here's a MIDI track, and send the output to. In fact, sorry, I need to go into my preferences and turn my output so I can send MIDI out down the MIDI net. Yeah, just need to configure that quickly. There's your MIDI that we recorded. Drop it onto that session there. This one's no longer being used. And if I press play, this MIDI should now be sent to Nick's, and it starts playing his piano.
And there it is. Warts and all.
Brilliant.
Now, I mean, there is this is like we say, it has a limited use, but I mean the thing is we're all in these times of lockdown, we sort of figure out how to use this stuff so it may be of use to a project that you're considering. We just thought we'd share it with you. So
I was just going to say, for me, I think it's all very well sending people forwards and backwards MIDI files and audio files, but when you're like this, you can actually spend a bit of time and going, you know what, on the third bar, can you change that? Can you go to a minor? Can you add the seventh? There's that dialogue that you can have when you're creating a track, even though there are some there's some discrepancies with the timing and things like that. But I think it goes a long way to be able to have this level of communication between a producer and a performer. And Nick could be someone in America or anywhere. I could be paying them a couple of £100 for a few hours work to play piano or something on my track. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, there are commercial things available to this. I mean, you can do things with Cubase. I think Steinberg have got something with VST Session, VST Connect. There are ways to do this, but we just went for the man in the shed. I wonder if we can get something to work like this. So I just wanted to. I think that that's kind of the fun of it, isn't it? Really, Matt. So anyway, Okay, so we just wanted to clarify something here, because basically what you were hearing, all that offset, that was to do with the audio we were sending each other. The actual MIDI data is going very quickly between our 2 points. So just to demonstrate this, what we've done is we've set up a little bit of extra session. So Matt, what do you explain what's happening here, and we can...
So what I've done, instead of sending a metronome as you normally would do from Ableton, which is built into it, what I've done is I've just created a MIDI track here inside of Ableton, and I've just programmed in basically a 4 to the floor, so it's on every beat basically just a MIDI note, which is going out of the MIDI network, MIDI net that we set up earlier. So that MIDI is just going straight to Nick basically, and Nick, you can then essentially use that to monitor to play your keys to.
Yeah. So what I've done here is I've got 2 tracks armed. The first track is coming from my local Arturia Keystep Pro, Keystep, whatever it is, Keystep 37. And the second one is just the same track, because I haven't got many instruments set up on this. That's only getting from external MIDI. So now what happens if Matt plays, I'm going to be hearing the MIDI arriving rather than the audio arriving. So we'll get a much clearer identification of how much latency there is inherent in these two point-to-point communications, because I think it was a bit unclear just listening to audio. So, Matt, if you want to play, if you play yours and I can listen. So,
cool. So I'm playing it now.
Right. So what we're listening to here is those notes coming into my track. So now if I play on top of that and Matt can record his end, then we can see how close my MIDI going back to him will be in time with the click, hopefully. 3, 4. Are you in record?
Yep.
Okay, stop that. I mean, that was a bit jazzy at times, but so you can see that that recorded the MIDI. So I guess what we're looking at is probably the last bar of those quarter notes I hit, because that felt like it was more in time. My playing's terrible, so
what I'll do first is I'll move over the click that I created for you and put it on just a 909 channel, so we can hear what you was listening to. So for reference.
Okay, so I'm getting that.
You're getting that, okay, Nick?
I was. Okay, what happens if you play my MIDI that I recorded to an internal instrument?
Okay, so if I then put your MIDI here that you recorded, and as we can see, it looks like you did a bit of a scale here, and then you just started playing F. So if I was to just kind of loop the last section of this. So let me take from bar 7 and to just loop that around there. So that's one bar basically. And then we've got.
Wow. I mean, you can see it's out, but it sounds all right. I mean, we're now the reason we're demonstrating this way because both audios are being generated by Matt and coming to me at the same time. So the time base is at his end only. So that, I mean, you know, I'm not a great player, but that's not bad. So that that latency is what that looks like about. Crikey, well, that's less than a 30-second, isn't it? That's a small amount.
Absolutely, right. Man. Totally usable.
So I suppose that was we just wanted to demonstrate the because we were listening to audio latency, which is a different thing than MIDI latency. So that MIDI latency looks like, I mean, that's in the tens of milliseconds, point to point. So that's something to consider.
Happy days. Works for me. I mean, you know, if I wanted to now, obviously you could go in, you can quantize the notes and move them around. But it goes to show that you is able to play to the MIDI I was sending you, and it's negligible.
So what's going to happen now with that, Matt?
Well, I think I'm gonna take the MIDI that you've got there. I'll use this for the first track from scratch, which I'll do live on sonicstate, TBC when that is. I'm sure we'll let everyone know about that. Probably, as per Nick's usual demos, put loads of reverb on it, slow it down a little bit, add
make me sound good.
Yeah, and then put some dirty kick drums underneath it or something like that, and let's just see where we can take it. And if you do tune in and watch this live, the great thing about doing these tracks from scratch, doing it live, is that if you're in a chat room, you can get involved. You can also make some suggestions, say, hey Matt, why don't you try this VST, or why don't you try this particular drum pattern, or add this kind of bass line or something like that. So do join us when we do that, and let's see where we can take it.
Absolutely, and stay tuned. We'll let you know via our usual social media, or post a news item about it, and give it a trail as well. But for now, I want to say thanks very much to Matt for being game for this. And if you want to find out any more about it, just drop it in the comments. And if there's anything that wasn't clear, we'll try and make it clear in further communications. See you later. Thanks very much. Thanks. See you later, Matt. Bye.
Nice one. Cheers. Bye.